Hello, my name is Benjamin Hart. I'm an American attorney and the managing director of Integrity Legal here in Bangkok, Thailand. As the title of this video suggests, we are discussing something that's being sort of euphemistically referred to as the Thai COVID pass. Now, this is kind of in the vein of things we've discussed previously on this channel, most notably the so-called vaccine passport. I'm going to go ahead and differentiate here when talking about this specifically from the so-called vaccine passport, insofar as I kind of think of the vaccine passport as documentation pertaining to international travel. And we've talked about that before, kind of akin to, there have been throughout the last century or so requirements associated with inoculations when traveling to certain countries. Basically, certain countries require folks sometimes to get inoculations. And the vaccine passport that was proposed, it's been going on over a year ago now, although in the beginning when people were talking about it, it was very interesting that they were dismissed as being sort of fringe thinkers for even bringing it up, if you go back to Q1 of 2020. But we have come to see that this notion, has come to the forefront. And in an international context, there's some, I hesitate to use precedent because we're not talking about the law, but there have been circumstances in the past where we've seen inoculation requirements associated with international travel. And so, you kind of see moving forward into the future, it's kind of that this vaccine passport or inoculation documentation is sort of in that vein. Now this Thai COVID pass, this is a horse of a very different color. This is a domestic document associated with operating in one's life, basically living one's life within Thailand. Okay? So we're going to go ahead, and I actually saw this in a clip from the briefing from the CCSA. It was actually from the English language briefing, which came from the Thai government. But I went ahead and I found a report on this from the Tiger. That's the Tiger, Thaiger. Hats off to those folks down there. We do appreciate all their hard work. And I'm going to go ahead and quote from the article on their website titled, "Zoning Restrictions Extended Until August 31. CCSA discusses, quote, COVID pass, unquote." So this is under the section of this article called, quote, Thai COVID pass, unquote, other initiatives, quoting directly, the CCSA is planning a so-called, quote, Thai COVID pass, unquote, for residents who are vaccinated against COVID-19. According to Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson Natapanu Nopakun, who gives the CCSA report in English, if approved, disease control measures would be eased for those with the pass, like dining in at restaurants, which is currently prohibited in, quote, dark red zones, unquote. Natapanu says details on the COVID pass scheme still need to be discussed by the CCSA. I'm going to get to that in a minute. With this, quote, Thai COVID pass, unquote, it would be possible to enter into restaurants when they are open and conduct some activities which are not allowed for those who have not been vaccinated, unquote, end quote. Okay, I got to say, if it's not readily apparent from my mannerisms, I'm categorically against this. I think this is wrong on so many levels, and starting with basic human rights, ending with creepy notions of papers, please, to be able to just operate in one's general living. Where have we ever in the history of time, other than very scary totalitarian regimes, there's no other real word for it, have we ever seen systems where people can't do basic things like sit down to eat without presenting papers, which I don't care if it's in a digital format, it's the same thing. It's presenting documentation to simply live one's life. So let's start from that standpoint first of all. The other thing is, all of this is operating from an emergency decree that was promulgated in March 2020. I don't think any reasonable person could argue that, perhaps an emergency decree was not necessary at that time. But, the notion that this is sort of an ongoing urgent emergency, I think reasonable people can definitely disagree on that. Meanwhile, just to re-quote a segment in here from thetiger.com, quoting directly, Natapunu says details on the COVID pass scheme still need to be discussed by the CCSA. That's the Committee on COVID situation. Well, who elected that committee? The folks that sit on, the Prime Minister, I understand, chairs it. But these people who are making all of these proposals, why isn't Parliament doing this? Why is this being done in this committee that's been set up ostensibly temporarily to discuss these matters? Why is it being done something this fundamental? I mean, this fundamentally changes how Thais and anyone in Thailand will live their life moving forward. Why is something this important being discussed by what is ostensibly a temporary committee? I'm curious to know that. To me, it would seem like the elected lawmakers that are in Parliament should be the ones, if we're going to be discussing this, they should be the ones discussing this, rather than the CCSA just sort of issuing this under emergency decree fiat, because this is major. I mean, again, quoting directly, if approved, disease control measures would be eased for those with the pass, so presumably those without the pass are, barred from living their lives as normal folks? Quoting further, like dining in at restaurants, which is currently prohibited in dark, quote-unquote, dark red zones. So, I'm just sorry. I'm not going to get in, and let me be clear. This is not an anti-vaccine video. I think vaccines are a modern miracle. Vaccinations have saved countless lives. There's no doubt about that. And quite frankly, we don't live with any of the diseases that, easily killed our forebears. And vaccinations, antibiotics are another example, are things that have, caused the longevity of the human race to this point. My point is not to go a little off topic. It doesn't have anything to do with vaccinations. People decide to be vaccinated, not vaccinated, whatever. That's up to them. Why is the government thinking that it is their prerogative and it's their right to tell the people, individuals, that, if you don't put something into your body, you can't live your life as you did in Q1 of 2020? Where did that come from? And why is the CCSA the one who's going to be telling us how this is all going to come down? Again, at the very least, one would think we could discuss this in Parliament rather than just this narrow committee that, the body of which, is made up of folks, some who are elected. The Prime Minister, again, chairs it. But the vast majority of these people, Tawisin, who's the spokesperson for it or heads it, he wasn't elected by anybody. This is major. This is a major proposal. Why is it just sort of being rolled out as if it's just a foregone conclusion? And again, this doesn't have anything. If people choose to get vaccinated, that's fine. That's great for them. If they choose not to be vaccinated, that's fine for them too. But, now we're all going to have all of our personal prerogatives dictated by whether or not we're willing to inject something into our body. And we're going to have to present paperwork that proves that in order to just go on with our lives. Moreover, if once this gets implemented, who's to say it doesn't change, that the mandate for provide this pass, it becomes a pass based on other criteria, non-medical related criteria. If, you are of a certain, demographic, pick your demographic. Oh, if you're of a certain age, well, you're not allowed to do this now, even though you're a legal adult, or whatever. There are a million ramifications to this, and the second and third order effects are terrifying. I hope cooler heads, reasonable heads, think this through carefully, and we don't rush into something that results in basically a society that, quite frankly, I don't want to live in, and I think reasonable people can say they would not want to live in. You know, I understand there's a lot of heated, positions on this. Again, it's not about vaccination to me. To my mind, if you choose to get vaccinated, great, that's fine, that's good for you. If you choose not to be vaccinated, that's your decision. It's up to you. But why is the government now intervening and deciding that they get to change the way we live our lives, or they're thinking about having to make us prove something in order to undertake basic rights, in order to exercise basic freedoms? I'm sorry, but I'm categorically against this. And again, I hope after folks kind of reflect on this a little bit and take a breath, we all say, hey, maybe this isn't such a great idea. But, I especially have problems with it in light of the fact that it's only being discussed by folks that, quite frankly, are not representative of the people of Thailand as a whole. They're not the elected folks in parliament. But to put not too fine a point on it, I just view this as a massive violation of basic human rights. The ability to go to, since when did being able to go to a restaurant, this whole paradigm shift that, to even be able to go out to a restaurant, you basically have to go through all of these hoops. It's just, again, as I said, when looking at the past, regimes that have had anything that look like this are places that most people now, in hindsight, say they wouldn't want to live. And I understand Western countries have tried rolling this out. That doesn't make it right. I think they're making a terrible mistake, and I wholeheartedly have disagreed with those regimes. I just hadn't seen it talked about here in Thailand because, quite frankly, I hoped we had, frankly, more sense than to think that this was a good idea. But now that this is being discussed, I just have to say I can't be on board with this, and it's not a good idea. I think there's going to be all kinds of negative ramifications from this, not least of which is, just a gross infringement of basic freedom.